Tadeo.
Nania.
I have lots of questions from today's viewers.
All right, please proceed.
Okay. The first question is, when we're connected to the energy shell and drop through into layers of the presence of the earth, is it possible for us to open portals to other realms? I had an experience with a portal where it opened and I was able to see into another elemental realm and a Pleiadian dimension. Can you help me understand that?
Well, yes, of course. The Earth itself, the physical realm, will contain portals to other dimensions. So just because we're talking about the shells that belong to Earth specifically, doesn't mean that you cannot cross-connect to the shells of other civilizations or other dimensions as well. There are always areas on your planet that allow for more accessibility according to the collective belief system of how these vortices are arranged in the physical reality. So yes, it's possible to connect to other dimensions, other civilizations through portals and vortices from the physical shell.
Great. Psychedelic experience may open us up to perceive some of these beings that are in other dimensions. Any idea of which beings or which energy earth shell we're tapping into when we see other beings?
Well, it depends on the beings that you're seeing. Okay. You can just specifically be tapping into the elemental shell and seeing elemental beings. But if you tap into some of the other dimensions or civilizations that most of you are connected to, like Sirius, like Pleiades, and others, the idea then, of course, is that since you've made those energetic connections already to aid and assist and guide you in this life by downloading information and energy from them, then of course, they're also going to be accessible to you through some of the portals and vortices that exist in physical reality.
When shamans take a shamanic journey, do they travel to one of the shells of Earth? And are shamans simply interacting with their own energy projected within a different frequency or dimension?
You're always interacting with your own energy, no matter what level you're on. Remember, you have to create out of your own consciousness, out of your own energy, anything that you perceive or experience in what appears to be your reality. So you are matching frequencies of other dimensions, other realms, other people, other civilizations in order to experience them, in order to recreate your version of them in your reality. But again, shamans being practiced at changing their frequencies in order to be able to access different dimensions, can access many different kinds of things. It just depends upon what their intention at the moment is, what their purpose is for accessing a particular dimension or civilization or group of beings. So it will vary from time to time, but yes, the whole idea of shamanism is the practice of altering your frequency to match the frequencies of other realities, other consciousnesses, so that you can experience them and gain information and knowledge from them.
What's the relationship between the shells and the Akashic Records?
The Akashic Records are simply everywhere, in every level. The idea is, again, remember, the Akashic Records are not a particular place. The Akashic Records is simply an old-fashioned way of describing that information exists here and now from everywhere. So you can tap into the idea of information anywhere you are by simply matching the frequency of the information that you seek. So the Akashic Records is not a particular place. It's accessible from everywhere because it is everywhere, because everything is here and now.
And are the 9 levels of consciousness you've spoken of before correlated in any way with the shells of Earth? And if so, can you explain more about that?
They're not correlated in the same way that we're now speaking of the shells of Earth. The idea of the 9 levels of consciousness are simply those that are relevant that you're tapping into in more and more rarefied realms of yourself to be able to guide yourself in physical reality. So they're mostly connected, mostly concerned with the experience of the physical shell, even though some of them are on the level of spirit, on the level of soul. But it's not exactly a one-to-one correlation. It's more like an parallel system that aids and assists you in guiding you in physical reality.
And does the future gray parallel Earth reality share the same shell structure as ours, or did their environmental crisis alter their shells? What ET species ultimately taught the grays how to cross dimensions, and did their intervention with the grays alter the Earth shell for the better?
There are some misunderstandings in the way the questions are being asked here. Remember that the grays are mutated humans from a parallel version of Earth. They were already evolutionarily, technologically more advanced than your version of Earth. So they taught themselves how to tunnel into parallel realities because they were already much farther ahead in their understanding of the whole idea of parallel realities and the vibrations that would allow them to succeed in crossing from one to another more consciously. The idea, again, of calling it the future is, again, a little bit of a misleading concept. They're simply in a parallel reality that may be representative to some degree of what you would consider your future timeline to be, but they are their own timeline, and they are simply at a more advanced stage, or were, compared to the idea of the Earth at that time. So the idea of their own shells were similar to yours because they were a similar version of Earth. And the idea of going into the evolutionary path that they went into, altering, mutating themselves, realizing they had to access other parallel realities in order to access viable human DNA, certainly gave them different choices and allowed them to access different portions of the different shells that we have spoken of. They, again, by becoming a hive mind, required guidance from other beings, such as the mantis beings, to oversee the idea of the hybridization project, since they no longer had, at that point, individual initiative. So the mantis beings and the other overseer beings had to give them guidance in that way because they simply functioned as a hive mentality, which made them efficient enough to get the job done.
Okay, so this next question shifts over to some nature elements here. This person's hometown was hit by a Category 4 hurricane recently and was devastated. You mentioned about the Earth shifting to the different versions of parallel worlds last time. How will these natural disasters shift with the new version of Earth?
Well, again, it's not that the disasters themselves shift, it's that the new version of Earth contains different weather patterns, different climate conditions. So while it may appear from your linear space-time perspective that these kinds of climate experiences will begin to mitigate themselves, will begin to balance and correct themselves, it's not that they actually change. It's that you're simply shifting to another Earth that has different climate patterns that are something a little bit more balanced, something a little bit more along the lines of what you would prefer to experience.
So when you have a challenging experience like that, where your whole hometown is wiped out, what is the way of staying in a positive state when, most people would feel quite devastated by the loss?
Well, again, it's about learning the lessons of the experience. So for a simplistic example, don't rebuild the same way. Build according to the changes. Allow yourself to realize the reasons why these climate shifts are happening. Because of the destruction of the environment, the acceleration of the cycle by the addition into the environment of things that are not necessarily in balance with the environment. So learning these lessons will allow you to begin to shift to other versions of Earth, taking different kinds of actions, showing in your actions that you understand the lessons, and doing things differently is what will actually allow you to shift to two versions of Earth where you can experience things differently, where you can experience things in more balance. So The idea of constantly rebuilding the same way instead of building to what is necessary for the climate shift, well, you have a saying on your planet that insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting a different result. So don't do things the same way. Change what you do, make different choices. Allow yourself to flow with nature instead of constantly going against the grain. And you will begin to shift yourself to a version of Earth where the climate situation will be far more balanced over time.
Yes, one person was asking, what actions can we as individuals take on a day-to-day basis to help heal the earth? Are things like recycling and turning off electronics doing anything to help? And this ties in with previous things that you've mentioned, which is if we believe Earth needs saving, then it needs saving. So do we ignore suffering or take action and raise our vibration so that we can shift to a healthier Earth?
Taking action is not the ignorance of suffering. It is the positive response to the idea that you observe what appears to be suffering and that you take the positive actions to alleviate it. You don't do the same things over and over again. You do different things that are more positive, more constructive. You take the actions that are representative of a more positive reality, a more positive version of Earth. It's not about ignoring anything. It's about learning the lessons from what you are observing or experiencing. So the idea, again, is not to think that the Earth needs saving, because, again, there isn't just one Earth. You will never change the world you're on. You will shift to a different world, a different version of Earth. There still may be many people who will not learn these lessons. So there always has to be, if they're going to choose negative things, a more negative version of Earth that they can live on or that they can die on. So the idea, again, is not that the Earth needs saving, because there isn't just the Earth, one Earth. It's about allowing yourselves to learn to work together, collectively, form a new consensus, and act on that new consensus in a way that is already representative of the version of Earth that you would prefer to shift to. Thus, giving yourself the navigational ability to shift to that Earth through the physical actions that you take that are more representative of how someone more positive would respond to the ideas that they observe, like suffering and destruction. So again, don't keep doing things the same way. Do new things.
Will there be some kind of a breakdown or collapse of governments and societies, et cetera, for positive change to happen on a deep level? Or can it be something more smooth, an experience that's just like getting an upgrade and an improvement piece by piece as we realize and implement solutions?
Again, it's not this or that, it's this and that. There can be either. It depends upon the individual. It depends upon their belief systems. It depends upon their frequency. Yes, you can experience the collapse of certain systems in a certain way to allow for new systems to come in. And yes, you can also experience these things very smoothly. So again, it depends upon your frequency, your belief system, and the actions that you take that are more representative of one way or the other. And just because certain things may collapse, again, doesn't mean that can't be experienced in a positive way. So there are all sorts of variations of the ways to experience shifting into more positive versions of Earth. It's not just this or that.
So, like, as far as resource distribution, how can technological advancement and equal resource distribution continue if humanity shifts to like these smaller and smaller locally focused hubs? How would that impact things like supply chains? Like right now, if you buy a computer, it's been made in so many places, it's not locally focused. And I think there's been expressed in some of the questions a concern that as we advance or we shift to a different Earth, whether we'll still have the conveniences and comforts that we enjoy due to technology.
Why wouldn't you? What kind of an Earth are you shifting to? One where that becomes difficult, or one where that becomes automatic and synchronistic, and that you get what you need and people make what you need in whatever area of the planet they need to that serves the best of all concerned. Why would you assume that going into a more positive reality would deprive you of things you actually need? That makes no sense.
So, what about these ideas of localized hubs that are making things? The reality is, we will always have, if we're going to have these technological advancements, more of a world supply chain as opposed to.
Not necessarily. Some things may need to be done locally. Some things may need to be done globally. But the point is synchronicity will organize all of that to the best of all concerned if you simply go with the flow. Let it work itself into whatever areas it needs to work into that serves everyone the best. You don't, again, have to keep thinking about these things as an either or proposition. You need to expand your range of variables, of possibilities and probabilities, of ways of doing things. One thing does not necessarily exclude another thing. They can work together very well if you allow them to. There's always another alternative. There's always another way. There's always another path that suits you. And if you're going to shift yourself to a world where the consensus reality truly is functioning on a more positive level, there are still going to be all sorts of variations of things happening in the way that they get done. Even on our planet, even though we operate on pure synchronism, there may be things being done by an individual, let alone a local hub, and there may be things that are being created globally. There may be things that are being created throughout the solar system. There may be things that are being created throughout the galaxy that serve a particular planet. Don't restrict the ways in which things get done if they're representative of a positive path. Who cares whether something is localized or whether it is global, as long as it serves the best of all concerned? Why would that be necessary to differentiate?
Yes, and it comes down also to the idea of scarcity of resources and the idea that we have strong beliefs about the scarcity of resources, and
Yes.
we are a master class in limitation.
Yes, but if you again allow yourselves to do things in a more positive way, you will realize there are other ways to do things that will allow you to know that your resources, the ones you truly need, aren't scarce. It's more a matter of distribution. It's more a matter of allowing yourselves to eliminate what you truly don't need and allow yourselves to rely on what you truly do need. And then you will find that the resources will match your needs perfectly. Because again, remember, the principle of the formula of acting on your passion is that synchronicity allows all the things that are necessary to be had to the level that they need to be had. It's not about having more than you need. It's about having exactly what you need, exactly when you need it, in perfect timing. So when you allow synchronicity to start truly being the organizing principle, even on a global level, there will be exactly the resources required for the things that need to be done. They will match perfectly.
So, yeah, that's a really interesting perspective because, for example, this question is talking about we have some of the highest degrees of limitation on our planet.
Yes.
And how does a planet get set up so that it's aligning its residents towards the idea of limitation? Like, how does the
It's simply a
planet...
matter of densification of frequency. The idea is that the more dense, the slower, the lower the frequencies are, then the more limitations you're capable of experiencing. But again, you chose a challenging class so that you could help evolve the frequencies of Earth into something more refined as you refine yourself. Remember, it's not just about the population on the planet, it's about the planet too. So the whole idea of starting in a dimensional realm of physical reality that starts out with slow frequency vibrations to allow for more density, more limitation to be experienced as the population also refines its own vibrations and uplifts them and raises them, so too the planet is given the opportunity to experience a refinement of the densification of its own frequencies, allowing it to become a class that can be used, a place that can be experienced for other beings in what you call the future without starting out quite so dense. You're uplifting the vibration of the planet, again, by shifting to different versions. I know this sounds confusing because we keep talking singularly and then we talk multiply, but that's just the nature of your language. Follow along. The idea is to allow yourselves, as you upgrade your own frequencies, to know that you are shifting to versions of Earth that are also upgraded in its frequency, so that the versions of Earth you ultimately wind up experiencing in a timeline will not be as dense. And so anyone else needing to come in at a certain level to experience certain challenges, certain transformational experiences, will not be starting out as densely as many of you did. So you're doing a service by providing an easier classroom for other beings in the future to be able to use the Earth cycles that you have used, but in a less dense, higher frequency way.
Right. And I can see where one of the most important changes for us as individuals is to let go of the concept of scarcity.
Yes.
As one of our fundamental ways of interacting, either through competition, or not that competition is negative, it's just the idea that the desperation that can come from
Yes.
feeling that resources are so limited.
Yes, and remember that it is your actions that also have made certain things more scarce because you don't act on them or use them in a balanced way.
Right.
It's possible you may have actually deprived yourself of certain resources, but again, that doesn't mean they cannot be replaced or substituted for other things that will serve you just as well. Again, when you go back into balance, certain things may remanifest, I'll just use that term, in a way that you will suddenly be able to discover, oh, look, here's another bunch of this stuff that we thought was all gone, because you've shifted to a version of Earth where it never was used up.
Right. And even in your conversations with us about abundance and understanding our relationship to abundance, that makes all the difference in terms of your vibrational level and that scarcity idea.
Of course, of course. So, what's the next question?
Are competitive games of dominance over an opponent still played in higher densities than ours?
No. It may appear to be competition, but it's mostly competition against the self.
And how exactly did the atomic bombs dropped over Nagasaki and Hiroshima affect the Earth's shells? Was there a large loss of life and intense heat that caused an interdimensional disruption that you've mentioned in previous talks? And were
Yes.
creatures that we were not even aware of destroyed in the blast, like elementals?
Not so much destroyed, but perhaps their abilities diminished, their abilities temporarily stultified. The idea of not having the ability to be as flexible as they used to be, not having the ability to go into certain areas that they used to be able to go into, to use the consciousness of the world in the same way. It's sort of more like the idea that certain areas became rigidized or diseased and not as flexible as they used to be, not as usable by the elemental shells, or the idea of the etheric shells in the same way that they used to be. It has, over time, subsided, but the idea, again, is this is one of the reasons why global thermonuclear war will simply not be allowed.
That is very comforting that you all are present to assist with that.
We assist, but again, we cannot do things for you. You still have
Right.
to change your own choices.
Well, like you mentioned that open contact will happen in like local reality bubbles. And just for those people who are ready at first.
This is the highest probability.
Can you elaborate on the kinds of encounters that will be typical in this early contact phase?
Again, individual encounters of a certain nature will become the norm at a certain pace, at a certain rate, but we cannot at this time go further into any descriptions